World News Today, brought to you by Admiral Corporation in behalf of Admiral distributors and dealers all over America and in many foreign lands. By shortwave broadcast, direct from important overseas stations and leading news centers in our own country, CBS reporters are waiting to bring you first-hand news from the world's political and battlefronts. Now, here's Douglas Edwards.
There's been no slowdown in the steady Allied advance in Western Europe. In the Aachen sector, Geilenkirchen has been captured. In the Metz region, the Germans are retreating toward the Siegfried Line and the Saar. Metz is now completely surrounded and tottering. American 7th Army troops have captured the road center of Blemau, 40 miles from Strasbourg on the Rhine, and there's fierce fighting in Belfort Gap to the south. In the Mediterranean area, British troops are now operating in the Yugoslav provinces of Montenegro and Herzegovina in cooperation with the partisans. In Hungary, the Russians are about to break through to the banks of the Danube just above Budapest. And now, a news report sent direct from overseas. Admiral takes you to Belgium. Richard C. Hottelet reporting.
On General Hodge's First Army front, the battle is reaching a more fluid stage. The steady land and air pounding were giving the Germans all along the line, coupled with swift jabs, first at one point, then another. This strategy of strength is having its effect. At some points, the enemy seems to be reaching the breaking point. Prisoners come in, dazed and exhausted. At other points, the Germans have begun to abandon their forward position. They've pulled most of their forces out of the town of Stolberg, leaving behind some snipers and acres of mines and booby traps. What they obviously hope is to be able to get more strength for the defense of key points like Eschweiler and Düren. But they're taking a terrible pounding, and every time they move back, they leave a number of dead on the battlefield. You can see them when you go up, lying in ditches and fields and shattered houses. The German commander must be a miserable man tonight. He sees us pushing in on him everywhere, day and night. When we're not moving here, we're pushing in farther down. And always it's our choice. All this while, our bombers and our artillery are reaching out behind his front, hitting his roads and railroads, his positions and his concentration points. I spent an hour this morning flying over the battlefront in an observation plane. And not 5 minutes ever went by that Captain James Townsend of Stanton, Kentucky, didn't turn around and point to another place the Germans were being hit. There were the thunderbolts flying in single file, climbing and weaving and then zooming down. It was graceful as a daisy chain, but they weren't dropping flowers. You saw the red flame of the bombs through black smoke and dust, and then they were climbing again, turning past us in a clean, easy circle to come back and spur the target with their machine guns. And there was the artillery. We saw the white smoke and the muzzle flash of dozens together. And we just sat up there and turned our heads to the left and watched the shells hit in Düren, Eschweiler, Heister, Notberg, and Arnhem. This is the symphony of battle. Still thunderous and slow, but there's no question about it. We're calling the tune. This is Richard C. Hottelet with the American First Army, returning you now to Admiral in New York.
And for a report from Great Britain, Admiral takes you now to CBS London. Eric Severide reporting.
Heavy November clouds hang low over north and western Europe. Flurries of snow have blurred the Straits of Dover. Particles of ice congeal the edges of the Dutch canals. And the passes of the Vosges are drifting deep. The earth is slowly hardening under the soldiers' boots, and that now is what they need. The time when armies went into winter quarters passed long ago. On the western edges of Germany, the attack is growing in power. By the Danubian plain, the Russians are massing their armies. The greatest assault in modern history is getting underway. It is a winter offensive, and it is designed to be the last. For 2 months until last Thursday, the tired people on this island deliberately held down their hopes. They have been disappointed too often before. For 2 months, we seemed to be stopped, and people accepted with resignation the idea of victory delayed until spring. But since Thursday, the immense size and power of the Allied force in the West has gradually dawned upon everyone here. They read that 1.25 million Allied soldiers are pressing upon 500,000 Germans, and they know that their men are vastly superior in tanks and planes. They know that the Germans have poured thousands of men and guns westward across the Rhine to face us these last 2 months. But the amateur strategist here is telling himself this: we probably wanted those German reinforcements sent across, for we could surely have destroyed the bridges but refrained. He tells himself that now the Germans have the Rhine at their back, And if they have not burned their bridges behind them, we can do it ourselves whenever we wish. The average observer expects now to see this German force cut off, encircled and destroyed on this side of the Rhine. And from the desperate cries of alarm he now hears from Berlin, he is coming to feel convinced that this is the last organized army the enemy possesses. And if this audience is right, we are now watching the first scene of the last act of the great tragedy. I return you now to Admiral.
We'll have more news from overseas in just a moment, but first here's Warren Sweeney with a message from Admiral Corporation.
Only Admiral Corporation, the world's largest manufacturer of radio phonographs with automatic record changers, can give you Slide Away. Slide Away has often been called the open door to good music, because with Slide Away, you simply open the radio phonograph doors, and out slides your complete phonograph turntable and automatic record changer. No lid to lift, no dark, unhandy compartment to grope in. Simply open the doors, and there it is. You can readily see how easy this makes loading and unloading your record changer with 10 or 12 records. Then you close the doors, it slides away, and you sit back and enjoy your favorite music. The new improved Admiral automatic record changer will give you some thrills, too. Never before has a record changer had so few moving parts. Never before such ease on your records. The new Admiral Tone-On exerts only 1 ounce pressure. Your precious recorded favorites will be safe, too, in the new Admiral changer. There'll be less chance than ever to chip or break them. Recent surveys show that a lot of you want a radio phonograph with an automatic record changer when they're back on the market. Well, if you want an automatic record changer that's foolproof and completely automatic, you'll choose an Admiral with Slide Away and the new Admiral automatic record changer. And now here once again is Douglas Edwards.
For a report from Mediterranean headquarters, Admiral takes you to CBS Rome. Winston Burdett reporting.
For the past 2 weeks, the Italian government in Rome has been in a state of crisis. The crisis has produced no cabinet changes. It is more a reflection of the general morbid discontent here in Italy. The people's discontent with the government's discontent with itself and its inability to bring about a real change. With a sense of frustration, Italians compare what is happening here with what has happened in France. They compare the swiftness of the French purge with the exasperating slowness of the anti-fascist purge in Italy. They compare the recognition given to French resistance forces with the way Italian partisans are being treated by the Allies. Once the partisans are behind our lines, they cease to be fighting patriots and are disbanded. One interesting recent development here was directly inspired by the French example. Just as the French set up a consultative assembly to give a cross-section of popular opinion, so the local committees of national liberation in Italy are demanding the same kind of assembly here. They're also demanding the right to represent the government in the provinces, or at least to have a say in the naming of provincial governors. It's very unlikely that these demands will be met. The final authority rests not with the Italian government, but with the Allies. Allied policy is opposed to conferring new authority on the local anti-fascist committee. It prefers to deal with only one Italian authority, the government in Rome. A national assembly without popular elections would not mean very much, and Allied policy is opposed to any popular elections in liberated Italy. What many Italian and Allied observers foresee is a much graver political crisis when we reach northern Italy. In the north, we'll find a situation closer to what we found in France. Partisans who have been fighting for us under instructions from our command, anti-fascist committees which will expect to have a say in political affairs, in short, a popular strength such as we have not seen in the South. In France, the Allies were prepared to let the French work out their political problems themselves. In Italy, our policy is very different. To the Italians of the North, we will offer an Allied military government, plus an Italian government strictly controlled by an Allied military bureaucracy. Many observers wonder whether the results will not be explosive. I return you now to Admiral in New York.
And here in New York, for a summary of developments on Leyte Island in the Philippines, is Columbia's military analyst, Major George Fielding Elliott.
The Japanese do not appear to be able to bring further reinforcements in any strength to their troops on Leyte. That they were able to do so at all was due to circumstances arising out of the great naval battle of the Philippines, which resulted in damage to some of our carriers and compelled most of the others to go back to their bases for fuel and bombs after the defeat of the Japanese fleet. Since this took place before the Army engineers had had time to put the captured airfields on Leyte into working order, an opportunity was created for the Japanese to run convoys across the Camotes Sea with additional troops, including the crack 1st Imperial Division and elements of 2 other divisions. It is the 1st Japanese Division, which is now virtually surrounded near Limon, and it can be driven from its present position. If it can be driven from its present positions, the situation of the Japanese forces on Leyte will become critical. The ground which they hold is gradually being constricted as American forces fight their way down the Ormoc Road from the north, up from the south, and also across the central mountain ridge of Leyte from the east. But the situation has greatly changed to our advantage since the carriers have returned to Philippine waters and since at least some of the airfields on Leyte are now available for our land-based aircraft. In consequence, we can now supply and reinforce our troops by sea, while the Japanese cannot do so at all in the daytime and can only run in a few barges at night under precarious and uncertain conditions. Thus, the battle for Leyte once more resolves itself into a struggle of attrition between 2 forces, one of which can replace its losses while the other cannot. To such a struggle, there can be but one end. The Japanese know this as well as we do, but they are fighting for time to improve the defenses of the other islands, especially the key island of Luzon, time also to consolidate their military situation on the Chinese mainland, to which the Philippines are, in the military sense, only the approaches from the sea. Once Leyte is securely in our hands, our land-based aircraft will be able to dominate most of the central Philippines, and we can begin a continuous series of air attacks against the Manila Bay area, which is the heart of the Japanese power in the Philippine Islands. We can then produce the conditions which seem essential for the further extension of our hold on the islands. That is, the complete neutralization of the enemy air power. Now, here again is Douglas Edwards.
Major Elliott has given us the significance of the current battle for Leyte. And now for an interview with a Navy flyer from Louisville, Kentucky, who was shot down in the recent Philippines battle. Admiral takes you after a few seconds' pause to CBS Pearl Harbor. Webley Edwards reporting.
Carrier airplane pilot who was in the second battle of the Philippine Sea. He got his share of planes and Japs and then was shot down himself. He's Navy Lieutenant Robert C. Ashcraft of Louisville, Kentucky. Will you tell us about it, Lieutenant?
Well, sometimes we wondered what our reactions would be when we saw the first Jap planes. When we hit ours over Leyte in the Philippines, they were Tojos. That's the new fighters the Japs have, and it's supposed to be a hot airplane. Well, there's 4 of us and 5 of them, and in one pass we got 4 of them. Each man got one. Later on, they sent in 25 twin-engine bombers without any fighter cover, and we had a field day with them. We got 17 out of the 25. Well, this was the first time my group had gotten into action. We felt pretty good. Next morning, we were in the ready room, and they told us the Jap fleet was out after us. We were in the carrier escort group, giving protection at Leyte. Well, everyone was laughing and joking, and we could hardly believe it. We went up on the flight deck, and pretty soon the Jap battleships were landing 16-inch shells right on their tails. Most of our fighters were on Leyte providing cover, and we had only 3 fighters on deck and 6 pilots. And we began matching coins, pulling rank, numbers, and everything to see who was going to get the fighters.
You got one of them?
Yes, it did, and we took off, fighters and bombers, and we knew we either had to stop this Jap fleet or turn them around. Our ships would have been slaughtered. We didn't know what we were going into or whether we'd get back or not. It was, as it was, some of the torpedo planes, after they'd used their torpedoes, made dummy runs on this force so they'd draw the fire and let the other torpedo planes continue with their bombing.
It must take a lot of stuff to go in there carrying nothing. I understand there was lots of stuff around to use bombs and ammunition on.
Our skipper said that within 10 minutes, everything he had trained for 8 years was right there beneath him. Within 10 minutes, he got 2 hits on a cruiser with bombs, 2 hits on a Jap submarine with rockets, and shot down a Jap plane. Pretty soon, our planes had gotten back, and we got the word that 100 bogies were coming in. so we had to scramble.
Will you tell us what a bogey and a scramble are?
A bogey is an unidentified aircraft, and when we identify them as enemy planes, we call them bandits. And a scramble is when we rush and get all planes in the air. Well, about this time, we went in different directions, and 4 of us together. We got word about 100 planes were heading in our direction. We looked at each other, and I guess we looked kind of funny. And all of a sudden, the 4 of us ran into about 20 Zeeks. When our leader climbed right into them, we had quite a fight there. We dropped our wing tanks to get better climb. That is all but me, and mine wouldn't work. My wing tank was smothered by, my wingman was smothered by Jap planes. One on his tail, and I got that one. Just then a Zeke got me in his sights and hit me in the engine and the stern. I yelled for cover and started home, and when some more Japs hit me, I had to go into the drink.
Well, how long were you down there in the water?
Until noon next day. That was a long time. What with the Japs flying over me and the sharks around me.
Did the sharks bother you?
No, not much. They swim around looking you over, and you look at them, sort of wondering who's going to eat who. Well, about an hour afternoon that day, Admiral Halsey's outfit came down, and I guess it was just good luck that I was picked up by them.
Well, that's a swell ending to a good story, and thanks for it. Lieutenant Robert C. Ashcraft of Louisville, Kentucky. This is Webley Edwards at Fleet Headquarters, Pearl Harbor. I return you now to Admiral in New York.
The people of the Midwest are getting an extraordinary opportunity to see the machinery that makes the United States Navy tick at a special war bond exposition. Some of the machinery will be of great peacetime value. So for a story on that, Admiral takes you to Chicago, Bill Slocum, Jr., reporting.
The United States Navy is currently unfolding for the people of Chicago a most awe-inspiring glimpse at the tools of modern war. As you inspect jet planes, landing barges, cannons, and such at the Navy Pier here on Lake Michigan, you cannot help but be a little depressed by the obvious fact that there are an awful lot of ways to kill a man. You must be grateful, however, because our Navy has very obviously been quite able to keep up with the pace on modern mass murder. In fact, it has introduced a few spectacularly successful innovations. But if this undercurrent of swift death belies the gay bunting and music at Navy Pier, there is one most pleasant feature of this bond-selling extravaganza the Navy has named Pacific Theater. This gayer attraction is a brief, tantalizing peek into the future. For instance, the helicopter. The very debonair and sophisticated metropolis of Chicago is currently on its ear over a couple of young Coast Guardsmen who are flying helicopters straight up or down, backwards and forwards, or just plain hovering in midair. One of these young men is Lieutenant Walter C. Bolton of Boston, who is with me now. Lieutenant Bolton and Ensign David Dershowitz each flew a helicopter out from Floyd Bennett Field in New York. And if you wonder what life in the 50s will be like, listen to Lieutenant Bolton tell about his 917-mile trip.
Well, it was something like an automobile trip, except we had no red lights. We followed roads, high-tension lines, and railroads.
How long did it take, Lieutenant?
Oh, it took about 3 days, but that's because we got caught in a pretty bad storm in the Alleghenies.
Well, I wouldn't want to be caught in a storm in a helicopter.
Why? What other kind of aircraft could do what we did? When we saw the storm was too tough, we just set down our helicopters on the side of a hill and waited.
How about eating?
Oh, we just fly along until we came to an airfield, and we dropped down from about 150 feet to about 20 and look over the restaurants. If we saw one we liked, we'd land.
Did you and Dershowitz ever get separated?
Oh, yes, just once. He wanted to take the right fork on a highway, and I wanted to take the left. So we went our separate ways. It so happened I was right, and in a little while, Dershowitz joined up with me. He had dropped down at a farmhouse for directions. The farmer's dog provided the only danger of the whole trip. Like most animals, he went a little batty at the sight of the helicopter and tried to bite Dershowitz.
How about night flying in a helicopter?
Oh, it's very pleasant, although we almost drove the Glenview Air Station out of its mind when we arrived outside Chicago that night. Our radios weren't equipped to talk out to the Glenview Tower, but they saw our running lights. They were trying to figure out who we were when the lights stopped in midair and started to come straight down.
They must have thought you were another secret weapon.
I don't know about that, but they did think we were going to land on top of some of their planes. We didn't, of course. We merely came down until we were level with the tower and asked the towermen where we should park our helicopters.
What about the possibilities of post-war helicopters?
Well, obviously they'll have to be bigger than they are now. We in the Coast Guard are very optimistic about helicopters for air-sea rescue operations. As for civilian use, well, remember this. It will take longer to learn how to fly a helicopter than an airplane. Although, of course, helicopter flying is much safer.
Thank you very, very much, Lieutenant Bolton. Drop in and see us some afternoon at Columbia, New York. There's a ledge right outside our window, and I'm sure I can persuade our pigeon to move over. I return you now to Admiral in New York.
And now for a summary of home front developments, Admiral takes you to CBS Washington. Don Pryor reporting.
Many months ago, General Eisenhower said flatly that Germany could be defeated this year if everybody at home and in the field did his duty. He hasn't revised that estimate, and military authorities here agree that Germany can be knocked out this winter. However, the great question mark right now is not about the armies in the field, but about production here at home. For the first time in a long while, the need for weapons and ammunition, especially rockets and heavy material, has outrun production. That's why the War Production Board is holding the lid tight on all talk about reconversion. They're not kidding when they say the war isn't over, and that now is the time for the greatest effort of all. Many lives depend on it. In Chicago, where American, British, and Canadian delegates have been attending an international aviation conference, the British have accepted a compromise proposal which follows the basic plan worked out by our State Department. It provides for an international air authority much like our own CAA, which would have regulatory power over all technical phases of air navigation. But the chances for another international agreement covering the petroleum industry look definitely bad. This was the first of a long series of special economic agreements and provided for an International Petroleum Commission to guide the fair distribution of production among the chief oil-producing countries. But the word today is that it will be left to gather dust in a Senate Foreign Relations Committee pigeonhole. Chairman Connolly merely says that no hearings on the agreement are contemplated this session. As for other congressional business, there's a strong and rather promising movement underway to streamline at least a large share of the legislative machinery. One of these is a proposal by Chairman Cochran of the Accounts Committee to abolish almost all of the 33 special committees now operating in the House and to give all of their powers to one standing committee. Most of these special committees, as Representative Cochran says, seldom result in anything but expense. Tonight at 10 o'clock, President Roosevelt will open the $14 billion sixth war loan drive with a brief talk, which will be heard on this network. I return you now to Admiral in New York.
General MacArthur announced today that American troops have landed on another island in the Mafia group, the island of Fanildo, off northwestern New Guinea, while heavy bombers were smashing a Jap battleship and a heavy cruiser. And now, once again, here is Warren Sweeney with a word from Admiral.
Admiral dual-temp refrigerators are consumer-tested and approved. It's true that the post-war dual-temp will be new in styling and design, with many refinements over pre-war models. But into it will go all the matured experience and know-how gained through building hundreds of thousands of pre-war dual-temps.
I'm going to need a new refrigerator, Mr. Sweeney, when the war is won. Will you tell me just how the dual-temp is different from other refrigerators?
Well, that's an easy question to answer. The Admiral dual-temp differs from the conventional refrigerator in that it's really two refrigerators in one. A larger, moist, cold compartment provides the finest refrigeration known for foods requiring the usual 38 or 40-degree preservative temperatures. Plus, a completely separated, completely insulated home freezer compartment at 5 degrees below zero that will hold 80 pounds of frozen foods. Think of it. 80 pounds, nearly 2 bushels of frozen foods right in your own refrigerator. Here at last is a home refrigerator that will efficiently quick-freeze foods at home or store frozen foods for months.
The dual-temp sounds like a homemaker's dream, but it seems almost too good to be true.
Surveys by leading universities and colleges, home economics laboratories, and testing laboratories bear out every claim that Admiral has made for the dual-temp. Present dual-temp owners, too, are uniformly enthusiastic about its many exclusive features. The post-war successor to the ordinary mechanical refrigerator will be dual-temp, and only Admiral can build a dual-temp. Travel on rail and bus lines for the first 8 months of 1944 was even greater by 14% than last year. If you take an unnecessary trip, you may be preventing a soldier or sailor from getting home for Thanksgiving or Christmas. Think before you go, and then don't go. World News Today is brought to you each Sunday at this hour by Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's Smart Set, and post-war makers of Admiral Dual Temp Refrigerators, Admiral Home Freezers, Admiral Electric Ranges. Warren Sweeney speaking. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.